Hello, I'm Lois Lindstrom. My guest today is Horace Edward Mann, the co-author of the book, The Queen and the USA. Welcome to the Bookman's Corner.
Thank you.
Mr. Mann, you've asked me to address you as Chip for our interview. So Chip Mann currently serves as the Democracy Outreach Consultant at the University of Virginia. From 2003 through 2008, he was Executive Director of the Jamestown 400th Commemoration Commission. The co-author of the book, The Queen and the USA, is Lord Alan Watson, who is a member of the House of Lords Select Committee in the European Union. He is the chairman of CTN Communications, former chairman of the English-speaking Union, and a former president of the Liberal Party in England. Their book, published by Dementi Milestone Publishing, offers a series of essays on the common values that underlie the political institutions of Great Britain and the United States. In addition to these essays, there is some reflection as well as a series of photo essays on Queen Elizabeth II's 8 visits to the United States, including 3 trips to Virginia. With the exception of President Lyndon Johnson, England's Queen Elizabeth has met every president of the United States since 1951. Chip, what inspired you to write a book about the Queen and the USA?
Well, as you mentioned, I had been the executive director of the Federal Commission for Jamestown, and Lord Watson was the British chairman of their effort over there. And so we had a liaison committee that worked together, and Lord Watson and I started to talk about the common values that are shared between the United States and England. And Lord Watson talked about the fact that the Queen represented a lot of these values. And as she was going into her Diamond Jubilee year, we thought about the fact that it might be helpful to emphasize the ties between the UK and the US, and also how she represented some of those democratic values.
Of course, the Diamond Jubilee took place in 2012, correct? And so how did you go about gathering all the excellent photos of the British Queen in this wonderful book?
Well, as the director of the Jamestown commemoration, I had 10,000 photos already.
You did?
Yeah,
Okay.
that I had looked at and scoured for different reports and things. And so it was fairly, and because of my research leading up to Jamestown, I had I'd done some research and had seen pictures, the same pictures that reappeared in different volumes. But what I found out was that there was no single volume that represented the Queen's 3 visits to Virginia. So I took it upon myself to pull those pictures into the same volume.
Well, this is a very impressive book, and I thought it was also very interesting to read the foreword of the book, which is by the retired Associate Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, Sandra Day O'Connor. Now, how did you approach her to write this foreword?
Well, she was the honorary chair of the Jamestown commemoration in 2007.
Okay.
So I developed a relationship with her, and she's all about civics education. And so the fact that the book was focused on the shared democratic values, she was the person that I thought of immediately when I needed a foreword to the book.
Oh, it was a wonderful foreword. And I also thought it was interesting in reading your book that many of our country's institutions trace their roots to the first permanent English settlement in the New World in 1607, Jamestown. Can you briefly describe those institutions? I mean, when did the Queen Elizabeth II first visit Jamestown, Virginia?
Well, she came for the 350th anniversary, which was held in 1957.
1957.
That was her first visit to the United States.
Okay.
But she felt it was important at that time that she established herself, she was a fairly new queen at that time, as a friend of America. So 50 years later, she comes to reify that. She goes to the same places that she had been. She's a great touchstone because you can talk about the progress that America and the United States have made, not only their own relationship, but helping to spread democracy around the world.
Wow. And then I also thought it was notable that, as you mentioned, she has visited the United States 8 times during her 60-year reign, and 3 of those visits were to Virginia. And then she often traveled with her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, to promote these closer ties. Why did she focus on close ties with the U.S., do you think?
Well, because of our shared democratic values. At the time that the Queen came in 1957, I think there were less than a dozen democracies around the world. Huh. Now, there are close to 100 countries. So because of the rise of mass communications and the end of the Cold War, there are a lot of efforts in trying to plant democracy around the world, and the British and the Americans work as the closest partners in trying to do that.
Okay.
And she has in promoting trade around the world, has also been someone that talks about democratic values, free trade, representative government, rule of law, those kinds of issues.
Yes, that's very interesting. And I also thought it was great, it was interesting in your book, you said that you wrote that Woodrow Wilson said World War I made the world safe for democracy, but you write that that war made Britain safe for the monarchy. How is that?
Well, actually, it was Lord Watson that wrote that.
Okay.
But he said that because what they did at that time was they readjusted the role of the monarchy because it was the beginning of the world of mass communication. You had daily newspapers, and the idea was that the monarch could help facilitate morale in the country. And it was a very difficult period for Britain, but the king at the time was a rallying point for helping to build the morale of the British people. And then, of course, Queen Elizabeth's father, King George, did the same thing in World War II, and that was expressed in if you saw the movie, The King's Speech.
Exactly, and I'm going to get to that question about that. It was also, I read in your book that the British monarchy dates back to 1066, but it wasn't until 1215 that the Magna Carta documents placed certain checks and balances on the excesses of royal power. And can you quickly elaborate on that?
Well, sure. I mean, at that time, the king, and it's interesting because we talk about the commemoration of Jamestown. The 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta comes up in 2015. Oh. And that's recognized across the world as the beginning of the rule of law, where the king could no longer do whatever he wanted, that there were certain restraints.
There were limits to his
That's
power.
right. Yeah. The barons put certain restraints on him, and a lot of it had to do with taxation, but a lot of it had to do with his attempting to administer justice with no counterbalance.
Right.
So I think it's fair to date the beginning of the rule of law to the Magna Carta, and of course that plays out throughout the British statutes, but it also has a direct impact on both in the U.S., both on the Declaration of Independence and our U.S. Constitution.
Yes, and also I thought it was very interesting to read that the English language is now ranked with Chinese, Hindu, and Arabic as one of the world's most numerous languages. I mean, the English language creates a serious bond with the UK, doesn't it?
Well, it's the fastest growing language in the world. It's also the largest second language in the world.
Wow.
And Lord Watson feels very strongly, having been chairman of the English-speaking unit, he believes that English is the language of democracy, that there are certain nuances in the English language to promote representative government and freedom that don't appear in other languages. And so he actually wrote a book called The English and Jamestown to show that Jamestown is the beginning of the spread of English around the world and its use in promoting political freedom.
History buffs will enjoy these photographs. You've gathered so many of these great photographs, and I think it would be wonderful if we could just discuss the next series of 15 photographs that I've selected from your book.
Absolutely.
So that that gives people an understanding, viewers, of what's there. So if we could start with our first picture. Now, this is Elizabeth as a child, right?
Right.
Queen Elizabeth? And she's living in London. And
the interesting thing that Americans don't remember is that she was never expected to take the throne.
No.
Her uncle was King Edward, who later abdicated in 1935 or 1936. And so she was the daughter of King George, but she was twice removed from ever taking. So when her uncle abdicated, then her father took over, and then all of a sudden it was realized that she was going to. So
she became very newsworthy really quickly, didn't she?
I think maybe the fact that there was not this expectation made her appreciate a little bit more the values of the average person.
Okay. And now what about another photograph from our We have
Yeah, I love this photograph. She became, this was taken in 1945.
this is the Queen
The
kneeling
Queen,
down,
yeah.
kneeling down, changing a tire. It looks like.
If you remember in the movie The King's Speech, she talks about the fact that she can tear apart an engine and put it back together. Well, she was trained as a mechanic in the auxiliary, in the women's auxiliary in England, when she was 17.
during World War II,
Yeah,
right?
it was 1945. It was just before the end of the war.
End of the war. Okay.
And she wanted to do this, and I also think that it helped her appreciate democracy even further. Remember, her house was bombed. I mean, she was living in Buckingham Palace. They took she and her sister, Princess Anne, out to Windsor.
Princess Margaret, right?
Princess Margaret, I'm sorry. Princess Margaret took them out to
Yes.
Windsor. But there's a picture in the book
Yes.
of the Queen's parents standing in a bombed out
It's
crater
that's right.
in Buckingham Palace. So she knew what the threat was to democracy.
Right. Well, I'd like to see the photograph then when she became headed toward. Now there's the photograph on with the young
Yeah, that's VE Day.
VE Day, and she's with Prime Minister Churchill,
Right.
and her parents on Buckingham
and
Palace.
Princess Margaret on the right.
Right.
And she adored Churchill, and he was very a great mentor to her. As she liked to tell succeeding prime ministers, Winston was my first. And he trained her well. I mean, if anybody could have been supportive and insightful from a political standpoint, it was Churchill, and she absolutely adored him.
That's fantastic. Now, what about the next picture we have is the young Queen with her children.
And this is Princess Anne and Prince Charles at a young age. They had a different upbringing than their mother, because it was always expected that they were in the line of royal succession.
Okay, so much more formal then.
Yes.
And now we have some pictures of her when she's visiting in the United States when she went to Williamsburg.
That's her coming down the stairway at the Williamsburg Inn in October of 1957 when she visited Williamsburg and Jamestown. There was a banquet held for her that evening at the inn in which all of the leaders of Virginia and the diplomatic corps got together, and so that was her first trip to the United States, and that's a famous picture of her in Williamsburg.
Yes, and now we have a couple more pictures of, this is when she's in Chicago?
Yeah, she went to Chicago. Interesting, I didn't know this, that was her second visit. She was only in America for about 14 hours. It was the opening of the St. Lawrence Seaway, and so she spent most of her time in Canada, but yes, she did visit Chicago.
And then she went to California, I believe, wasn't it?
Yeah, this is a picture, I think, when she went to the Reagan Ranch, and this is Yosemite.
Okay, it's like in 1983. Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and then she, of course, went on to Kentucky. This is the Derby, right?
This is a photo with Will Ferris, who was the ambassador to the United Kingdom, the Court of St. James, in the first part of Bush 43.
Okay.
And he is a famous thoroughbred horse breeder, lives in Kentucky.
Right.
And the Queen, if there's anything that she's passionate about outside of her responsibilities, it's the Kentucky. I mean, it's thoroughbred racing.
Yes, she loves
it was,
horses.
It was a
doesn't she?
natural. Yeah,
Yes,
it was a
yes,
natural that she
okay.
would visit.
And now our next photo, I believe, is.
Yeah, this is her giving an award to General Schwarzkopf in 1991. She was in Tampa, and this was thanking him for his handling of the joint military operations in Desert Storm.
That's great. That's great. And then she was in another.
Yeah,
college,
there's William and Mary, my alma mater.
Yes.
She has visited William and Mary twice.
Mm-hmm.
She came in 1957, and this is in 2007, and she spoke to about 7,500 students and townspeople that were gathered in the back of the Wren building. She, let's see, at that point, she had visited Jamestown, we had had lunch, and then she left the Wren building and then went back to the Williamsburg Inn to prepare for her departure for Louisville, when she went to the Kentucky Derby the next day.
Okay, and now we have the next slide shows the, I believe, another trip in Virginia.
This is one of my.
Is this
It's one of my favorites.
Is this in Jamestown?
No, this is actually at the Capitol, in front of the Capitol of Virginia in Richmond.
Okay.
The Virginia Indian there is a good friend of mine. That's Chief Stephen Atkins of the Chickahominy tribe. And the Queen made it a point because there was a history of minorities having been ignored in the previous Jamestown commemorations. She made it a point to shake the hand of every chief. There's 8 chiefs of tribes in Virginia. She made it a point to shake the hand of every Indian chief, and I can tell you that look on Steve's face, because we're all really good friends, and that looks...
He's very pleased, right?
Very pleased, and he always looks at you and he goes, "It's all good." Well, he had just said, "It's all good."
It's all good, that's right. Okay, and our next photo we have is the Queen's
At
luncheon.
lunch. That's actually in a tent at the Governor's Palace in Williamsburg, in the restored Governor's Palace. We have First Lady Ann Holton, who of course is married to Tim Kaine, our now U.S. Senator, who was governor at the time. Colin Campbell, who is the president of Colonial Williamsburg. Lynn Cheney is in the white jacket.
Wife of the vice president.
And then the vice president was actually sitting off to the right, but the vice president was her escort throughout the day when she came down to Jamestown.
Okay. Now back to Williamsburg. I believe they were in a carriage, right?
This was actually taken on the front steps of my house.
Oh, wow.
I lived on Duke of Gloucester Street at the time, and she rode down the Duke of Gloucester Street in a carriage, just as she had done in 1957. And about 10,000 people, this was an opportunity for the public to see her ride. And so she rode down the Duke of Gloucester Street and waved to the crowds. And of course, everybody.
And the Duke of Gloucester Street
is the main drag, and it's the main street in Williamsburg. It's the restored area.
Okay.
And,
that's interesting. And now, of course, this shows another great picture of her in New York, right?
The only time that she's been back in the States since 2007 was she went to the UN and to New York City in 2010. And this is her laying a wreath. I cannot remember the number, but there were several dozen British citizens that were killed on September the 11th of 2001, and so she was laying a wreath in their memory.
Okay, and then our last photo we have of this group is her grandson.
Well, this is Prince William and Kate, who, of course, are extremely popular since they got married a couple years ago.
Yes.
We put this in the book because we wanted to show the continuity, that the Queen is not just a staid symbol of something that is past. She is passing on her lineage and her heritage to her grandson at some point. And so the glamour uptick is there. People have to remember that when the Queen was first crowned, she was considered very glamorous too. Of course, she's more like a grandmother now.
Yes.
But at the time, she was considered glamorous. So this whole idea of this new generation coming in and taking over it happens every once in a while.
Well, regarding that last photo, I was curious because Prince William's father is Prince Charles.
Right.
And I'm curious about your views on the Queen's possible abdication. I know that Queen Beatrice of the Netherlands recently abdicated for her son to become king. When do you think Queen Elizabeth will abdicate to allow her son Charles to become king?
She won't.
She won't?
No, she won't. Unless she becomes very ill.
Okay.
And her sworn responsibility is to her people and to her role as their monarch. And she takes it very seriously. And so unless she gets to a point where she feels she can't do her country right, I get that question a lot about her abdicating because Prince William is so popular and, well, can't they just kind of skip over Prince Charles?
Yes.
That's really not done. I get the question from Americans, but I'm telling you from my British sources,
also,
they are telling me there's just no way that it's going to happen.
Okay. Well, now, of course, Queen Elizabeth II is 86 years old and has been a great queen, discreet, modest, and regal. didn't you have a chance to meet her when you were in England this past summer?
No. I met, I met her when she came in 2007. I'm friends with her personal assistant, Angela Kelly, who designs her wardrobe.
Okay.
And Angela just has a book out
Okay.
called Dressing the Queen.
Okay.
I'm going to have to ask Angela to promote my book over there, but I'm promoting Angela's over here.
Of course.
And but I met the Queen in 2007. As I said, she had visited William and Mary, and then she came over to change. She changes clothes a lot, and she came.
That's good for the fashion industry, right?
Yes, she came to Williamsburg Inn and changed her clothes before she got on the helicopter. And they said, they called me and they said, "You've got to come over here before the helicopter takes off." And I thought, oh my goodness, there's a problem, because I was responsible for all the movements that day. And I went over and they said, the Queen wants to meet you. And I said, yeah, right. What's really the problem? And they said, oh no, the Queen wants to meet you. So I got called by the equerry, Mr. Horace Edward Mann, and I went into the room and she said, Mr. Mann, I remember, and this shows that she takes her role seriously. She said, I was here 50 years ago, and we walked over the ground, and at that time we did not know we were walking on the fort. And today we learned that the fort is there.
Yes, yes.
And so she gave me a gift. She gave me an autographed photo of
great.
she and Prince Philip. And she's very charming.
Well, let me ask you, has she read this book?
Let's see. I talked to Angela about that, and Angela said that we gave her a copy in May. And
May of 2012, right?
Right, May of this past year. And Angela says that what she does is that she gets the books that are about her, and she takes them with her on her holiday for Christmas, and that she looks at them at that time. So she was gathering all the books that are about her. Angela had seen it, and Angela loved it and said that she thought it was terrific, and she thought that the Queen would like it too.
Oh, good, good. Well, I found your book fascinating because of the essays interspersed between the historical photographs of Queen Elizabeth II. I mean, how did you pick the essays for this book?
Well, part of it came from what Lord Watson and I thought were key values that we share in common with the British. And so things like representative government. The first legislature to meet in America was the General Assembly of Virginia when it met in Jamestown in 1619. Well, there were 2 members of that legislature who had already served in Parliament. So when they were looking for a model, it wasn't like they had to develop something from scratch. They said, well, why don't we do what we did in Parliament? So you have these values and these ideas on how people can self-rule that was just as much a part of the baggage of the ships that came over as the nails and the hammers and the cloth. Those thoughts and ideas were brought to Virginia, and in different circumstances they were planted, and they took root. So you have representative government, you have rule of law, in which the British don't have a constitution. We do. So, rule of law goes from the Magna Carta and then us codifying it and putting it into the Constitution. Respect for diversity, respect for freedom of conscience. All of these ideas have British roots. And we just took different circumstances and put them in, like I said, planted them in the soil of Virginia, and they took a different path.
And now, have you plans for writing another book?
Well, Lord Watson and I have kind of talked about it. He has probably thrown out 4 or 5 ideas, and I'm trying. But the one I think that tends to resonate is we're thinking about doing a book on the similarities and the roots of the legislature in America and how it started with Parliament. And because you see, 2019 presents an opportunity because that's the 400th anniversary of legislatures in America. So we're thinking about doing, and he is a member of Parliament, so we're thinking about doing a book that shows how did Parliament arise, how did it grow to 1619 when it was first planted, it was first started in Virginia, and then you had that fascinating period for 150 years between 1619 and 1776, where all the different colonies are trying out different styles.
That's right. That's
so it, there's the way that we ended up with our legislatures, 50 legislatures in the United States, they all have the same roots, but they took off in 50 different directions.
It was like the Great Experiment, really, isn't
That's
it?
right. Yeah, it's a laboratory.
A laboratory
Yeah.
of ideas. I found it interesting to read in your book that the British Queen's full name is Elizabeth Alexandria Mary Windsor, and she was born in London on April 21st, 1926. Can you tell us how her father's name changed from Saxe-Cosburg-Gotha to Windsor?
It was because of World War I.
And what happened?
Well, the concern was that it was too Germanic. Although all the houses, the royal houses were related to each other, and they all had a direct tie to Queen Victoria. Of course, there was a lot of tension and later bloodshed between the Germans and the British. So it was they worked on how to anglicize the name of the family, and there were a lot of things that were floated around. The Mountbattens, suggested it may be Mountbatten. Then there were Battenbergs, but finally, in the idea that they wanted the most British name that they could come up with, they came up with Windsor, which is what the castle outside of London where they spend a lot of their time.
Okay, it's named after the castle.
It's named after the castle's not named after the family. The
family's named after
the castle.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you. Did you have any feeling that you would write another book about Queen Elizabeth?
I think that I've probably exhausted that. I mean, unless there's something profound that happens in the next few years. One of the things I will say that it would be an opportunity for a book, and thank you for giving this to me. She is the head of the Commonwealth of Nations, and they really, the British government is looking at the opportunity to have the Commonwealth be a platform for spreading democracy.
Okay.
So over the next 10 years, and I expect that she's going to be around because, her mother lived to be 101.
That's right.
I think she'll be a very vibrant queen, and maybe the Commonwealth component is the next book.
Now, where can our viewers find your great book?
Well, it's both on Amazon and in Barnes & Noble, and then we have a website, thequeenintheusa.com.
Great.
And so that people can look up and get some background on the book.
And you told me you give lectures about the book, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of interest. When you find a pocket of interest in the Queen, it's very intense. And there are English-speaking union clubs around the country, chapters. But I gave a lecture to about 400 people in Richmond. There's a big Anglophile community in Richmond, Virginia. We've been to Indianapolis, New York, been to...
And how about the schools? Are you talking to students?
Yeah, I have lectured at UVA and at William & Mary about this.
Good.
So it's but it's not. The idea is to look at the Queen as a political symbol, not just her personal life, but to look at her as a political symbol.
Well, she is very impressive, and this book is very worthwhile. And I'm so glad you joined us today.
Thank you for saying.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us, and please join us again next month for a new edition of the Bookman's Corner. I'm Lois Lindstrom.